So, what's diversity and inclusion? Why does it matter? Well, while this might seem like a weirdly hot button topic, corporations are increasingly taking the topic of diversity and inclusion seriously. And doing so is not only ethically important, but also part of effective communication. Addressing diversity and inclusion is a multi-layered process that requires a wider range of leadership practices. Though they seem to be different concepts, they're actually interrelated processes. The study guide questions today start with being able to understand these important terms and move into several topics not in our book. The positive impact, inclusion framework, and what leaders can do to advance diversity and inclusion. We'll not leave out the hard part. There are definite barriers in place. Diversity is about variety, or difference. Let's look at a few different definitions. Diversity is often used to refer to the mixture of races, genders, or religions that make up a group of people. Harrison and Sin define diversity as the collective amount of differences among members within a social unit. Diversity refers to policies and practices that are designed to include people who are different in some way from the traditional group members. You'll also find that if you go around telling people, "We talked about diversity in class this week," you'll get a variety of responses. There are generational differences in understanding the terms as well as polarizing political viewpoints. Okay, so remember the mental schemas from chapter 6? For me, I always have to remind myself that when I talk about diversity, my audience isn't thinking what I'm thinking, that it's a goal and it's important. Millennials may think of a mix of backgrounds and perspectives and focus on unique experiences and teamworks. Baby boomers may see this as fairness and protection for all. Some people may see this as destructive, others see it as vital. Here's how we're going to define it for this class. Diversity deals with the amount of difference among members. Core or primary dimensions of diversity include age, ethnicity, gender, mental, physical abilities and characteristics, race, and sexual orientation. Secondary dimensions include communication style, education, family status, military experience, religion, language, location, income, work experience, and work style. Primary dimensions are more powerful and less changeable, and many are categories protected by laws in the United States. Secondary dimensions can change. They're less visible and are typically less influential in impact. Now let's define inclusion. It's the process of incorporating differing individuals into a group or organization. The goal is to create an environment where people feel like they belong. This promotes retention, satisfaction, and overall performance. I'm sure that you can understand that. It's nice to belong. In an environment where inclusion is prioritized, there's a goal to incorporate the opinions of the minority, to give a voice to everyone. Everyone will feel like they have a place. The book gives several ways people have defined inclusion in the past 60 years. Let's complicate this with a more recent quote. The difference here is acknowledging that some groups have experienced historic power kept from other groups. Truly inclusive environments will acknowledge this. They will take intentional steps to practice this. They may include formal and informal policies to support this. You can be a leader in this area no matter what your position. Take a look at this data from a McKinsey & Company report. In an organization, and this will not come as a surprise to many of you listening, certain groups are prone to feeling less included. This is particularly true for women, ethnic and racial minorities, but it's also pretty complex. In 1987, Gloria Anzaldúa published an important work called Borderlands, La Frontera, the New Mestiza. It's definitely worth reading. In it, and this is a vast simplification, she points out how, as a woman who grew up on the Texas-Mexico border, the difficulties of living on the border categories like these. She was a woman, expected to behave in gendered ways with additional expectations as a Chicano lesbian. The McKinsey report authors commented that the LGBTQ+ respondents may have skewed towards senior employees, but I'd complicate it with the Borderlands research. Many of us are on the borders of different categories. We're not going to fit into neat charts and graphs, and neither will our coworkers, employees, or supervisors. So what should we do? One way to help this process is to focus on equity. Our book explains this as the process of recognizing historic inequalities. This is different from focusing on equality, as the book points out. So remember, this is an equity versus equality contrast. To summarize, diversity focuses on recognizing differences. Inclusion is concerned with embracing those differences, and equity aims to provide equal access to resources for historically disadvantaged people. Another way people put this is diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, and equity means making sure everyone has had a chance to take dance lessons. The dance lessons part, that can be the hard part for leaders. Before moving into the next section of this lecture on impact on organizations, I do want to make one comment about the book's explanation of the historical approaches to diversity. The book claims diversity was at the foundation of the United States democratic system. I disagree. Without going too off track, diversity for the Puritans meant slight variances in theological perspectives among white English clergymen of similar demographics. They all took the same dance lessons, to put it simply. They definitely did not come to the United States because they valued the perspectives of others, especially minorities or women. It's been in the past 50 years that we've seen any widespread focus on diversity and a shift to valuing diversity and inclusion in organizations. In the field of business communication, that shift happened in the 1990s with an emphasis on multiculturalism. In management more broadly, this became an important topic during the past 20 years. Be sure to pick up on the timeline in the book and the way terms like melting pot and salad are used. Yeah, I heard a lot about the melting pot versus salad when I was young. Let's jump to present day. We now know, and scholars continue to explore, how a smorgasbord, rather than a salad or a pot, celebrates the unique qualities of a variety of people. Let's look at 7 points of how diversity and inclusion impact organizations. Now, some scholars think these are benefits of diversity, but let's remember that inclusion matters. These are benefits of an inclusive, diverse organization. First, cost savings and talent retention. Let's say you're a woman and you decide to have a baby. An environment that allows flexibility in letting her, say, make doctor's appointments and attend them without penalty, that's likely an environment she'll want to keep working at. Same goes for her partner. Rehiring people is costly. Now, I can say, having been at Deloitte at a time when they went through a vast organizational change to recruit more female managers, that it was really interesting how their policies changed. Second, talent acquisition and utilization. Now, this is a generational shift. The typical American baby boomer did not look for a diversity statement. Now we know that organizations with a positive reputation for true diversity and inclusion will attract top candidates and recognize talented people in lower level positions. Third, keeping and gaining market share. Diverse organizations understand needs of a variety of target audiences. So, right, if you're selling to a particular group, you probably should have that group as part of your team, right? Fourth, better decision making. Homogeneous groups tend to succumb to groupthink. A variety of perspectives and backgrounds gets groups to look at more angles or viewpoints of an issue, and that leads to more problem-solving strategies. Fifth, greater innovation. Inclusive organizations are more open to ideas. And sixth, higher performance. Research shows that companies with good diversity practices often, but not always, perform better and are generally more profitable, with higher profit margins and better return on equity and assets. Want to know more? Search for McKinsey Diversity and Inclusion. They have excellent reports, including on diversity and inclusion beyond the United States, where we focused this lecture. Let's look at number 7, excitement and commitment. A different McKinsey report found that people who feel very included in their organizations are nearly 3 times more likely than peers to feel excited by and committed to their organizations. Here's a quick survey to help you see how this matters. 39% of respondents to this McKinsey survey on organizational barriers reported turning down or not pursuing a job because of a perceived lack of inclusion. If you're like me, when you think Avon, I think makeup, older women. What may surprise you, and did me as well, is that Avon's leadership was heavily male-dominated. 98% of the sales force was women, but the promotable positions were dominated by men. Avon brought on a CIO, Chief Inclusion Officer, in 2011, which is not that long ago. And that person, Leslie Mays, began with a steering committee, gathered data across 6 countries where Avon was doing business, and started a program to promote women. In the past few years, Avon has made such big changes that it was even recognized as being the best in Brazil for gender equality in employment. While Mays recommends going big from a C-suite position, she has another piece of advice any of us could use. She says to convince the biggest detractors. That's a brilliant piece of communication advice. It encourages you to think about your audience, how they could disagree, and how you can move forward with plans to promote an inclusion framework. On this slide, you'll see an inclusion framework published in the Journal of Management in 2011. There is tension here. People want to feel included. They want to feel like they belong. They also need to differentiate themselves. The framework looks at these two tensions in terms of how belongingness, i.e. the desire to be included, interacts with uniqueness, the desire to maintain one's identity. Shore and his fellow researchers explain that these were key elements to inclusion and that inclusion leads to high-quality relations with the supervisor and group members, job satisfaction, organizational commitment, job performance, and well-being. The exclusion quadrant in the top left represents individuals in a group or organization who feel left out and excluded. They do not feel a part of things, and they do not feel valued. They feel like outsiders, like their uniqueness is unimportant or irrelevant. A sense of rejection from coworkers and supervisors is detrimental to mental health and attitudes toward work. Here's another point to consider. Women who are executives in top teams tend to leave firms at a higher rate than executives who are male. That's because traditionally women have had lower power but higher recognition for their unique human capital in the marketplace. The differentiation quadrant in the lower left describes individuals who feel unique and respected, but who also feel left out and not a part of the in-group. You can see differentiation in practice with free agency or freelancing. A company pays a talented or unique person to address an issue or contribute, but doesn't hire them permanently. An individual may feel uncomfortable because of the emphasis on their value as uniqueness. That uniqueness focus may lead to stereotyping from other employees. The assimilation quadrant in the top right represents people who feel they are insiders and in the organizational in-group, but whose unique characteristics are not really valued by the organization. I was thinking this kind of falls into the we don't see color argument. This might mean an individual tones down their individuality to fit in. This kind of conformity can be exhausting. It can lead to employee turnover. For example, think of a stereotype of how a lawyer actually dresses. Studies in the 1990s found that women tended to adopt more masculine dress to fit the mold of what is considered to be a successful attorney. And if you've revisited women's outfits from the 1990s, you'll notice a lot of shoulder pads and very weird and uncomfortable suits. It's a shame. It's a very sad thing, so go Google that. The inclusion quadrant in the lower right describes individuals who feel that they belong and are valued for their unique beliefs, attitudes, values, and background. For example, an employee who is older than any other work group members may have knowledge of the company and its industry that is potentially valuable to the group. If this person is treated as an insider with highly valued knowledge, then the older employee will have a strong sense of inclusion and the group will be able to benefit through improved performance. The framework also illustrates inclusion as an integration of two factors, an individual's connectedness and a person's individuality. The framework underscores that differentiation focuses primarily on people's differences, and assimilation focuses primarily on people's connectedness to the whole. The multi-level inclusion process framework treats inclusion as a multi-level process centered on each individual's experience of inclusion. This occurs as a result of inclusional practices on many levels, including interpersonal, group, leader, organizational, and societal. Ferdman's framework illustrates how inclusion at one level is related to the way inclusion is practiced at other levels. The framework emphasizes that the individual inclusion is the foundation of the framework. The whole idea is that a single intervention at one level won't get you to inclusion. It needs to happen at multiple levels, and the levels will interact with each other to propel inclusion. Fun fact, this model is similar to health intervention models. For example, if health communicators want people to wear more sunscreen or wear seatbelts, it isn't enough to just push that practice at one level. It needs to target multiple levels to get traction. We've covered why this matters. Now let's talk about what you can do. Remember that throughout this course, we're talking about how you can communicate effectively as a leader, whether you're an entry-level employee or in the C-suite. There are practices anyone can apply. First, to help others feel safe, involved, engaged, respected, valued, influential, and whole. And yes, that's a huge ask. There are things that you can do. To help individuals feel safe, it's important for leaders to treat followers in a non-threatening way. Let's say someone makes a point that goes against the rest of the group. A leader promoting inclusion might amplify that person's voice by asking for more information, even if the leader also disagrees. To help people feel engaged, you can make sure you're sharing information freely as a leader. One interesting concept in communication is the concept of in-groups and out-groups. Be careful that you're sharing information with everyone equally. To help people feel respected and valued, consider practices that contribute to developing empathy. Put yourself in the shoes of others. Express care. Demonstrate trust. To help people feel influential, you can be sure to give credit for ideas. If you catch someone stealing someone else's idea, point out, "Oh, I think Gail said that earlier. Gail, can you explain more what you meant?" People want to feel like they matter, and it really stings to get your influence taken from you. One other thing to consider here would be democratic communication processes. Microsoft Teams and Zoom have rolled out tools like polls and forms to promote participation, but there's a lot of potential there to get more voices heard effectively and cheaply. To help people feel whole and authentic, establish an environment where transparency is rewarded, not punished. There is tension sometimes in wanting to be yourself while also wanting to be part of a group. This can prevent one from feeling authentic and whole. You also need to recognize, attend to, and honor diversity. This is an ethical as well as legal imperative. Further, you cannot just be fair, you also must appear to be fair. This means this isn't work you can only do in the background. People need to know. Workers should be able to talk about their social identities openly. Race, nationality, gender identification, and other things. They should be able to celebrate their identities and the unique perspectives that they provide and to discuss together ways in which the group members' diverse backgrounds and skill sets can be mutually beneficial. This is a small example, but think of holidays. For example, and this is one of my colleagues' stories, at her kid's school, the administration has done a lot to promote inclusion. But this past year, despite a large Chinese American student population, Chinese New Year went without any recognition at all. That's unacceptable. So while my colleague is not a leader in that school, she's going to use her voice to advocate for this next year. All this, engaging in mindful communication can go a long way to reduce the impact of stereotypes, prejudice, and other things by being aware of your assumptions and others. Mindfulness means you have a focused attention on your communication and thought processes. Your thoughts are influenced by mental models or schemas. Remember chapter 7? Those models are influenced by experiences, culture, television, society, but they can be wrong. A schema that is built from biased information or incomplete information can lead us to stereotypes, and then we can stereotype others. Leaders should monitor their actions and others for communication, like microaggressions or assumptions that might be counter to inclusion efforts. One thing I catch myself saying is, "you guys," which I never said before I moved to St. Louis, where I spent my teens. So "you guys" is probably something that needs to be cut. And I hate to say it's much better to say "y'all," but y'all is our vosotros form and it's more inclusive. It just works a little better. Say everyone, say y'all. Finally, you can establish accountability. At a larger organizational level, diversity and inclusion efforts should be data-driven. Companies should keep track of their diversity profile and measure progress on diversity metrics like turnover, absenteeism, employee makeup, accommodations, and policies. Establish accountability by reviewing these goals and data routinely and figuring out where to go from there. Share these results with the organization for transparency. Now, this isn't on the test, but it's important. Embracing diversity and inclusion, if that's a goal for you or your company or organization, will face barriers. Scholars Johnson and Hackman note that many organizations, often unintentionally, do things that keep minority groups from participating. This can be really long work weekends or night hours that make it difficult for single parents to participate. Some groups will be less comfortable with self-promotion and need mentoring in that area. Some companies have inaccessible facilities that, while in compliance with ADA, make life really difficult for someone in a wheelchair. Here are a few more barriers that you see listed on the slide. Ethnocentrism is the tendency for individuals to place their own group, ethnic, racial, or cultural, at the center of their observations of others and the world. Ethnocentrism is a perceptual window through which people make subjective or critical evaluations of people from cultures other than their own. Now, I am going to say that these terms will show up, so do pay attention. Prejudice refers to a largely fixed attitude, belief, or emotion held by an individual about another individual or group that is based on faulty or unsubstantiated data. There was a Yale University study that found male and female scientists were more likely to hire men, pay them more, and view them as more competent. We also see this with race, including in medicine with things like minorities getting fewer organ transplants. Also called implicit bias, unconscious bias is the term used to describe when we have attitudes towards people or associate stereotypes with them without our conscious knowledge that we are doing so. Generally, we attribute our personal failings to external factors and successes to internal factors. So, if you fail the BCOM test, the professor made it too hard. If you ace it, it's because you studied hard and you're brilliant. Conversely, when members of outgroups or marginalized groups fail, we blame internal factors: laziness, poor character, low intelligence. When they succeed, we attribute it to external forces, help from others rather than internal factors. Unconscious bias is malleable and can be changed by devoting intention, attention, and time to developing new associations. There is evidence that even minimal interventions in reducing stereotyping and discrimination can be effective. A stereotype is a fixed belief held by an individual that classifies a group of people with similar characteristics as alike. There can be negative and positive stereotypes. Stereotypes label a group of individuals as the same at the expense of recognizing the uniqueness of each individual. Stereotypes can reduce uncertainty in some situations because they provide partial information to us about others. Stereotypes are a barrier to diversity and inclusion because stereotypes categorize individual followers into a single classification, which prevents the leader from seeing each individual's unique merits and qualifications. For example, how about the stereotype of Asian Americans as good at tech skills but not managerial skills? Right now, Asian Americans hold only 1 to 4% of upper management positions in the United States. I encourage you to search for the term model minority for recent articles in Forbes and Bloomberg on this. According to an article in Bloomberg, white men and women are 154% more likely than Asians to hold an executive role. According to 2012 data, Asians represent only 1.5% of corporate officer positions in the Fortune 500. That's unacceptable. Finally, privilege. This is an advantage held by a person or group that is based on age, race, ethnicity, gender, class, or some other cultural dimension, which gives those who have it power over those who do not. Having privilege can blind individuals to the experience of the underprivileged. This whole lecture topic is really important to me. And something I saw is missing from the JSOM curriculum, but I'm not an expert. I'm a middle-class WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, or kind of Protestant, living in a Dallas suburb. And while I've made efforts to study culture and ethnicity, I've found privilege sneaking up in surprising ways. For example, both of my parents had an education past undergraduate. They understand what I'm doing generally, and they value it, and they prepared me for it. That's not true of some other faculty members I know. You must continually be introspective and self-aware. As you study this for class, I encourage you to take this farther with 2 workshop activities at the end of the chapter where you observe and consider your own hiring experiences and workplaces. Let's end with a quote from Claudia Bryn Woody, a global co-chair for the LGBT Executive Task Force at IBM and a vice president there. She says, inclusivity means not just we're allowed to be there, but we're valued. I've always said smart teams will do amazing things, but truly diverse teams will do impossible things. That's the end of my quote. She said it's up to us, those in the workplace, to make this change, to push for inclusive and diverse environments. She says, quote, we can't wait on the government, NGOs, activists. We all have to do our parts. The roles we play, corporations, governments, and activists, all need to find ways to work together. We at this corporation lead the way and influence businesses, like our suppliers, and governments need us to invest in a country, lab, or manufacturer. We have the power of corporate brands to promote and live the values we espouse. All right, so there's some deep thought for us all, because the way we live our lives is our lives, right? And you spend most of your life at work. So remember that the people around you remain people, unique people, and treat them that way. Hope y'all have a good day. Bye.